Welcome to the Teachers Pep Rally. If you missed our last episode, we had a very energized conversation with the educator and author John Crippo about his EduProtocols, which are effective instructional practices that are student-centered and teacher-approved. Please go back and check it out. And while you're there, leave us a review. We value you and these conversations. Okay, our guest has an English literature degree from Cambridge University and a master's in creative writing at the University of East Anglia. And I'll have to make sure I pronounce that right. She also has a postgraduate diploma from the London School of Journalism. She looks at the world between two covers, that's book covers. She is known as a reading explorer who in 2012 read books from over 196 independent countries around the world. She famously shared her story on the TED Talk platform about how novels are one of the best ways to open our minds. She's the author of several books, including The World Between Two Covers, Reading the Globe. Let's talk about life, reading, and learning. Please welcome to the Teachers Pep Rally, Anne Morgan. Welcome, Anne.
Thank you for having me.
We're so excited. And, we've had some Canadian friends on here, but you are the first person that we have on here from England.
Oh, wow. I'm honored. Thank you.
We're honored. We're so happy to have you here. Before we get started, I'm just going to mention we have our wonderful library reading wizard here with us, Kristen Rosenberg. Yeah.
Hello.
So excited to have you back. She's going to sit in for Letitia. Letitia had a conflicting schedule, so of course, we asked our reading wizard to be here with Anne Morgan. Come on. Before we get started, we're going to just make sure Letitia, likes us to all kind of set the stage, get prepared, have a healthy mindset, and to share a happy happening this week. So we're just going to go around the table, and Kristen and Anne, of course, we'll let you guys go last to give you an opportunity to think about what you'd like to share. But just a happy happening can be personal, professional, whatever you like. Fred, you look like you might be ready. Are you?
So I have a howler in my background right now. So my dog's in there. He's in the other room wanting attention. My happy happening is a quick and easy one. So we are on the backside of spring break, which means we are in the chute heading for the end of the term, which then is followed quickly by summer and warmer weather days. But I love the energy coming out of spring break. Actually, it usually sounds like, oh, you're back to the grind, but the students were really a lot of fun to talk with and get back in the saddle, and projects lining up. It's a good vibe feeling in post spring break. Even though everyone's always saying, I wish the break was longer. I think everybody's happy to be back and in the groove. So it was a good upbeat energy week. So now that we have that, we're actually moving forward. But that's my happy happenings this week. It was a simple one, so it was good.
That's a good one. I love that. Always great to walk in. And we've talked about that vibe when you walk into a classroom. Or the library, right, Kristen? When the vibe in the school, something's off or something's great. So I'm glad that you've got that good positive energy. How about you,
Yes,
Pete?
Just surrounded by such a feeling of community right now. We are in the middle of our big production of the year, and just to see all the alumni and families and teachers and community members come together, that's what it's really about, not putting on a show, but bringing everybody together around the campfire and doing something special. But it's just I'm very tired, but I'm very, very happy and full inside. So it's a good trade-off. So that's been my happy happening for the whole week so far. So
that's amazing. And the pictures of the kids just being in their element and enjoying themselves and having a space to be so creative, it's been really fun to watch. So
thank you.
Very, very excited for you. I'll go next, and then Kristen, and then Anne. So I try not to cheat by doing this, but I'm going to be honest. My happy happening is happening right now. So I'll explain a little bit more when we get into this, but there is a full circle moment for me having Anne here because I used to use her resources when I was teaching my 10th World Language Arts. And so I'll share more about that. But Anne, you're my happy happening for sure this week because we are here and talking to you, and I can't wait to dive deeper into what you've been doing. Kristen, so that means you're next.
I don't know why this week, but I thought of a book that I read when I was a kid. I got it secondhand from a library book sale, and I read that book to pieces. I don't know what it was about it, but it just really clicked with me. And so I thought of it this week and I was like, surely it's not in print. And apparently it just celebrated its 60th anniversary with a reprint. So I ordered a copy just in case, because my little girl, she and I have similar tastes, and we've been reading it at bedtime and she loves it. And of course it is not modern, so there are a lot of things that are like, okay, we're going to talk about this part later, but she's been loving it, and just to be able to revisit the characters has been so lovely. So we have been reading The Little Witch by Anna Elizabeth Bennett, and it's been really sweet.
That's awesome.
Beautiful.
I remember that book. I love that.
Mhm.
Okay, Anne, how about you? What's your happy happening this week that if you'd like to share?
Yeah, so I have a daughter who will be 6 weeks old tomorrow, and she started smiling this week. So
That's it.
so that's a nice happy happening.
That is
That's
it.
awesome.
That tops it. That's so sweet. I'm so excited. Congratulations, by the way.
Thank you.
Yes.
Okay, so let's talk a little bit about not only Kristen's amazing guest. So if you watch our YouTube videos, you've got to see it. We're not going to say who it is, but you don't want to miss it. You see she's got a special guest who's appeared in here. And I mentioned at the beginning in your introduction that you came about reading 196 books from independent countries. So I'm wondering, could you kind of tell us what was the catalyst for this overzealous and, by the way, amazing idea that you had? How did this happen?
Yeah, well, it was really a chance comment that an American book blogger made to me on a blog that I used to do about reading books from different countries, that made me look at my bookshelves in a different light and realize that almost everything on them was written originally in English. And that didn't make sense to me when I thought about it, because I knew there had to be loads of amazing stories written in other languages. And why would I shut myself off from all these amazing other stories that had to be out there? So this was back in late 2011. And so I decided, because 2012 was going to be a very international year for the UK. We had the Olympics, we had the Queen's Jubilee, well, the one that we had before the last one. There are always jubilees going on in this country. And lots of people were coming to the country for different reasons. And so it seemed like a good time to try and go out and meet the world through books. So I set myself this challenge to try and read a book from every country in the world in a year and blog about it. And I registered my blog, ayearofreadingtheworld.com, and basically asked the world for help. What should I read? Because I didn't know what I should read from most places. And the world started to tell me, and not only that, they started to help me and do all sorts of extraordinary things to make it possible for me to achieve this slightly strange, eccentric goal that I'd set myself.
I think
It's amazing.
I think it is amazing.
It is amazing. It's incredible, actually. It's just fun. It's just fun. And I think people think about it, but doing it's another thing. So it's really cool.
Thank you. Well, I didn't realize at the time it was entirely naive, just for my own interests, but it became a life-changing quest. And 10 years later, I'm still very much reading the world and doing lots of things connected to it, and talking to people like you about it, and doing all sorts of writing and things it's changed my life totally. I mean, it's been transformative, and I'm incredibly grateful. And as I say, it is now a lifelong quest, really, rather than just a year, although the blog is obviously called A Year of Reading the World. But yeah, 10 years later, we're still there.
Yeah, it seems like it's kind of become like this gift to you that just keeps on giving, as long as you're open to it.
I think that's right. It took me some time to learn how to be at peace with it. There was a period where it got a bit overwhelming shortly after the TED Talk and the book came out, and I was inundated with messages, and I still receive messages pretty much every day from people around the world about books, which is lovely. But at one stage it became a little bit much, and I wasn't quite sure how to handle it. And I was I think a lot of people often think I'm the head of an NGO or something to do with international literature, and I'm a bit shocked to find out it's just me. But I had to find a way for it to be something that I could do sustainably, but also that I could do well, because I didn't want to just it to be a gimmick. I wanted it to be something that I could add value to that would be useful for people, because a lot of people had been really good to me and helped me to achieve this and shared lots with me. So I wanted to create and maintain a resource that would be of value for other people as well. And that took some time after the original project to work out, but we're there now, I think. It's a lovely thing. Yeah.
So could you kind of go into then how did you go about selecting the books? And then I also like to tag onto that question is, were there books that were part of, I guess, the beginning of reading more from that author? Did that ever happen too? So how did you pick those books? And then did anything kind of go off to the side for you a little?
Yeah, so it was a real hodgepodge of things, because this was not at all a scientific thing. I mean, to read the world, you know, if you were trying to look for the best book from every country, I'm certainly not the person to do that. I'm not an expert. I don't think it's possible for one person to be an expert in world literature, because the world's too big. Even experts in regional literature can't know enough about the literature of every country to be certain of, you know, and the word best is not helpful anyway. So it wasn't a case of trying to choose the book that represents a nation or is the quintessential story from a nation. It was really, sometimes it was a number of people recommended the same book, and so it seemed like a good choice. Sometimes something sparked my curiosity, and it seemed like actually a non-obvious choice. So my Saudi Arabian book, for example, was a book called Girls of Riyadh, and that was recommended to me by someone who pitched it as the Saudi Arabian Sex and the City, which I was intrigued by that. So, you know, but obviously not necessarily what you would consider a quintessential story from Saudi Arabia. And sometimes it was, often someone provoked me or made a point that made me think, oh, I should follow up on that. So my Indian choice, for example, India was the hardest country to choose a book from. There's so much literature, amazing literature written in English in India and written in a number of other languages. And it's just this, it's so difficult. And I kept getting recommendations from people, and the list on my blog, if you look, all the recommendations I got during the project and immediately after it are on the list. So you've got the link to the one I read, the review I wrote about it, but there's also all the other possible eligible titles that I could have chosen. And India just kept getting longer and longer and longer. And every time I asked someone to help me choose, they just suggested more books. But then I was saved by a woman who I'm still in touch with today, who's a journalist and writes about books in India. And she left a comment saying, I see that all the recommendations are titles written in English, but actually that's second best, in my opinion, to the literature written in India's 22 other scheduled languages and many other non-official languages. And she said, my favorite author is a writer called M.T. Vasudevan Nair, who writes in Malayalam. And I recommend you try and find a translation of one of his books. So I thought, yeah, that's a great point. And she highlighted yet another blind spot I didn't even know I had. And this project was a constant process of discovering and trying to address blind spots. The initial blind spot of, why aren't I reading literature written in other languages? And then a huge number of other discoveries and constant expansion. It's something to this day I'm still constantly discovering, oh, I didn't consider that, or I should think more about that, or maybe I need to address how I'm approaching that. And that is what you do when you read literature from such a broad range of perspectives. You're constantly challenged to recalibrate your thinking, I think.
That's cool.
But in terms of your, leading on to other writers, well, even more than that, many of the writers whose work I read during a year of reading the world became friends, and I actually, and it's been lovely because, I mean, not all the writers are still alive, but in some cases I've been contacted by relatives who've shared how much it's meant to them to have the work featured in the project. For me, the most amazing story, and I'll try and keep it short, but because I can talk about this book for years, but there's this extraordinary book called An African in Greenland, by a writer called Tete Michel Pomassi, translated by James Kirkup. And Pomassi is an explorer from Togo in Africa, and he this most extraordinary life story, but basically he ended up being told at the age of 14 that he was going to have to go and live with the python cult in the jungle because they'd performed a cure on him, and he was afraid of snakes, and he happened to discover a book about Greenland in his local bookshop. And he said, not only did this amazing country have no snakes, it had no trees in which they might hide. And so he ran away from home at the age of 14 in the 1950s, worked his way up through Africa, got a boat to Europe, worked his way across Europe, learning languages as he went, relying on the kindness of strangers, meeting hundreds of people, got to Denmark and got a boat from Denmark and went to Greenland and lived with the Inuit for 2 years. And wrote this most extraordinary book about it. It's a book full of love, full of curiosity about humanity, about the world. Anyway, when I wrote about this book on the blog, I said, this is the writer I would most like to meet in the world. 10 years later, his book was re-released. It was originally published in the late 70s and early 80s in English. His book was re-released as a Penguin Modern Classic, and Penguin, the publisher, contacted me to say, oh, this book's coming out. And I said, can I speak to him? He's now in his 80s. He lives in France. So we had this most amazing Zoom call, and he was so gracious and so wonderful. And I held up a copy of his book, and he held up a copy of one of my books, which was so touching. I was completely blown away. But he's coming to the UK to meet me in October. He's actually moving back to Greenland at the end of his life. He wants to end his days there. It's the place he fell in love with. And he's going to spend the rest of his life writing and thinking there. But he's made an exception. He's going to leave Greenland to come and see me at the Cheltenham Literature Festival in the UK. So I will get my wish to meet him. But that's just an example of some of the extraordinary interactions
That's fantastic, though. That is an amazing story, though. That's beautiful. Wow.
And he's a living legend. He is absolutely extraordinary man, and he speaks so many languages, and his view on the world is just incredible. So yeah, that is a book I would heartily recommend if anyone's looking for recommendations. But
I am just so happy right now. This is like the perfect scenario for me. I'm drinking coffee. We've got Ann Morgan on. I've got the rest of my friends here, Kristen, Fred, and Pete. We're nerding out about books. Like I just is so happy. I might just start crying. And I think that this is kind of the point, and you probably didn't even, well, I know you didn't. I'm confident you didn't realize this is the journey that this idea was going to take you on, but it really sounds like it just made the world a little bit closer to you, right? Like that you were able to make all these kinds of connections, and just kind of realize that there's so many things about all of us that's similar. And a lot of that just is that we're just human, and we just want to make connections while we're here in this world. And for a lot of us, reading does that for us, right? It allows us sometimes to be the only space where we can get to learn about another country, get to learn about other people. And so I'm curious, when you started trying to pick out these books, I can't imagine it was, I mean, you mentioned in some it was hard to choose just because there were so many to choose from, but then did you also find there were areas around the world that you're like, I'm not really getting a chance to read some representation from there? Like, was that really difficult? What did you do in those instances?
Well, that's the thing. So when I did my project, I was trying to read books from UN recognized nations, and there were a couple of exceptions and additions to that, which it's too lengthy to go into, but that was essentially the list I was working from. At the time of my project, around 11 UN recognized nations had no commercially available literature in English translation, nothing that you could buy. And it's still the case that not every single country has representation in English. Now that's significant because English is the world's most published language. If you are published in English, you have a huge global reach, but you also have much more chance of being translated into other languages because of the way the publishing industry works, the book fairs work. So if you are published in or translated into English, your chance of actually reaching a global audience is massive, much bigger than someone writing, say, in Arabic. And so the fact that certain countries had actually nothing available, and it was a surprise to me because some of them were countries where many of the official languages were widely spoken. So French and Portuguese speaking Africa, for example, many of those countries did not have a novel or a full-length collection of stories or that I could read in English translation. And it's still the case. And the most extraordinary example, I mean, it has been lovely since the project. There have been several countries that translators, because they've heard through my project there's nothing available, they've gone and they've found literature to bring into English. So there's now a book from Guinea-Bissau, for example, that's available. And similarly with Madagascar, there was a translator who went and spent 2 months there and found a novel to bring back and get funding to translate into English, which is Nevo's Beyond the Rice Fields, which is a wonderful book. And the translator's name is Alison M. Charette. She's a US-based translator. But Sao Tome and Principe, which is a Portuguese-speaking African island nation, there was nothing available in English translation from there. And several times during the project, I solved this problem by sort of asking around and sometimes reading unpublished translations that people shared with me, or in one case, someone for his PhD for fun, he translated a novel from the Comoro Islands and he shared the manuscript with me, quite extraordinary. But with Sao Tome and Principe, I kept asking and no one could help. No one could recommend anything. And I was a real pest. I mean, I was contacting doctors working on placement there, students on their gap year, anyone I found on the internet who had any connection to the country, and no one could help. So I ended up on social media just saying, is there anyone who would be prepared to help translate some literature? And I thought, who's going to want to do this? You know, I'm this eccentric person in London. No one's going to want to give up their time for this. But within a week, I had more people than I could involve in the project, volunteering. And these were everyone from someone, there was only one person I actually knew. Everyone else was a stranger. One person I'd been at school with, who'd studied literature for a couple of years, who'd studied Portuguese for a couple of years at university. Everyone from her through to a woman called Margaret Jules Costa, who translates Nobel Prize winners. And she contacted me and she said, I've heard what you're trying to do and I'd like to offer my services. So I found this collection of short stories by a writer who was born in Sao Tome and Principe. And I got enough copies to send one out to each of these volunteers and divided up, said, could you do these two? Could you do these two? And so on. Within 6 weeks, they'd all returned their translations and I had the whole book to read. So that was extraordinary.
It's amazing.
What that showed me though is, and I think something that is the abiding realization from my project, for me anyway, is the love of sharing stories and the enthusiasm that people feel for that is universal. It's something that unites humanity. So whoever we are across all kinds of borders, you know, political, geographical, religious, everyone loves sharing stories. And the pride and the happiness that people see when other people listen to their stories and celebrate them and are interested in them, that is an extraordinary thing, and it's a way of bringing people together. And in the face of all our difference and difficulty, it's something that will really, I think, gives me huge hope about what we can achieve as humanity.
Absolutely. And I see Kristen, our school librarian, just nodding and making all kinds. Are you relating to this?
So much of what you're saying started because you had one idea, like, hey, wouldn't it be fun if and I feel like so many people have moments like that and they go, oh, wouldn't it be fun if I blank? And then they put that and they stick it on the shelf and they say, oh, that's nice, I'll look at it later. And they go about their life. And you took it and you ran with it. You've changed people's lives because you stuck with your idea. And I think that's the stories that you're telling are fascinating. And it's so heartwarming to hear the way that people have come together to help support you. And in doing so, provide resources for the world.
Well, thank you. I mean, I hope that they're useful. I think that it is about curiosity. People respond really well to open curiosity, to you saying, I don't know something, but I'm curious to find out more. And I think that was what people responded well to. But also in terms of what kept me going, or what sort of held me accountable, I suppose, was the fact that so many people so early on supported me. So I felt, I mean, the great example for me was 4 days after I posted that I planned to do this project. So back in 2011, before the year had even started, I put a call out saying, what should I read? 4 days after that, a woman in Kuala Lumpur called Rafida left a message saying, I love the sound of this. Please, can I go to my local English language bookshop and choose your Malaysian book and post it to you? And I was amazed, a stranger 6,000 miles away was making this generous offer. And so I enthusiastically said yes. And as soon as I clicked send, I thought, oh gosh, I've really got to do this now. There's a stranger 6,000 miles away going out of her way to, go to this trouble. So that it was kind of symbiotic, really, because, feeling, well, people have spent time, they've invested in this, they've got behind me, so I can't let them down, and it was a lovely thing, but it also, that's what kept me going. It was other people. Yeah.
What I love is that they're not strangers now. You've dropped so many people's names, and I believe you know them and you care about them. You've connected with them, and it's all because of this project, of this passion. But it's amazing that you know everybody's name and all the authors and the people that reached out to you from all around the world. That's what it's all about.
Yeah, connection. Absolutely. Yep. I think you're right. Yeah.
And especially too, Pia, that's a great point, because, when you think about the past few years with COVID and everybody kind of like collapsing in on themselves in a way. And I think that we lost that connection, that connective fiber in a way with each other. That's the right way to say that. But the books are that one vehicle you could still rely on to keep connections alive, learning about other cultures, kind of seeing into other worlds, experiences. That's something that should have, your story is just such a positive reminder of that. And I think that's something going forward. I hope everybody listening to this kind of takes the same idea in some fashion, and maybe not so much as the broad sense that you did it, but kind of go forward and re-explore these opportunities through Kristen's library world. Let's remind everybody that this is still there. You still could do these things. It's not done. So that's really neat.
Yeah.
And it's a good time to mention Anne has a list of all the books that she read that year on her website, and we'll give that information at the end of where to make those connections. But so my story is, when I was teaching 10th grade world language arts, I would always do an independent reading project where students got to pick any book they wanted to read, as long as it was in the Lexile, right? The right reading level for them. And this was high school. And ideally, Anna wanted them to read something from an author that was not from the United States and not from the UK, because that's typically what you see in the canon of our school programs. And so when I was having students try to find books, some of them were struggling, and I started doing some research, and that's how I came across Anne Morgan, was doing this research to try to find some place where I could send students and their parents and guardians to try to help pick out a book. And so it just became that list for years I was using to send to the parents and the students to pick from it. And that was the list they got to pick from. And what's cool is that you list all the different countries, right? And the books that you read. So even if a student wasn't sure about the titles of the book, if they had an interest in reading from a certain country, that's a lot of times how they picked it. And then we would look at it, read the summary of it on like Amazon or something like that. But that's why I reached out to you. And this is full circle, because you just were such an amazing resource, even though we didn't know each other, for my students for so many years. And they still, when I run into them or they reach out to me, they still talk about that. And I do think that, to Fred's point, that we have to remember that it just kind of reminds us that, this stuff is really so simply at our reach. We just have to make an effort to do it. And I had a lot of students who were saying they're not avid readers, and then they would do this, and there was something that clicked. There was some kind of opening connection of reading something from somewhere else, that all of a sudden now they've become a lover of books and a lover of reading because of that. So that's kind of my cool full circle moment, Anne.
Oh, that's so lovely. Thank you, Erin. That's lovely to know. And it is really heartening. I mean, I have over the years heard from many teachers in different places who have in different ways used the website and used the TED Talk as well. So I had, at one stage, I I had a series of videos coming into my inbox from students in Beijing who'd recorded little video messages telling me about books that they liked. And one was a little boy who he wanted to tell me about this textbook that explained why tomatoes can sometimes be quite dangerous. I just, it was amazing watching these little videos, and that was their homework assignment: make a video to recommend a book to Anne Morgan. So yeah, it's really heartening to hear that, and lovely. And I think also something that I think about more and more these days. I think when I did my project, so it wouldn't have been possible to read the world before the internet in a year, because the connections, the speed of getting in touch with people, research, it would have been a lifelong project, as it is for me now. But the whole getting around the world in that time, contacting people, writing letters to people, calling people up, would have taken years. However, I'm not convinced it's possible to read the world in quite the same way, or it would be for an unknown person to start out and do that project in quite the same way now, because the way the internet is now, the algorithms have grown so sophisticated. They're all tailored to our individual preferences, the things we search for. It saves time, of course. It's very efficient, but it means that you don't stumble across things in the way that you used to in the early days of the internet. And you can't make connections quite as randomly or quite as widely as you used to be able to. Books, however, still enable you to break out of those bubbles. They still enable us to rewire our algorithms, our mental algorithms, and you can access stories that are totally different through books. So I think that is one real argument for continuing to read widely, because actually now when we go on Google or whatever search engine you use, what you see isn't the world. It's not everything that's out there. It's what's most likely to appeal to you or to reinforce your preferences, your beliefs, your views. And so actually the internet is not as enlarging a thing as it used to be in that way, but books still are.
I completely agree with that. And this is really odd that you just said that, because that has been a conversation I've had with at least 3 different individuals this past week, but regarding music.
Wow.
And
okay.
We were lamenting, I'm a little bit older than, well, I'm a lot older than my students, but I was lamenting over music and the ability to flip around all kinds of stations rapidly. I know we could do that with certain apps, but I'm losing sight of what else is out there now in terms of music without a conscious, hard effort to find it. And that's exhausting some days. I think maybe I'm showing my age truly. The last thing I just want to say real quick, I know we want to move on, is Killer Angels. You picked an excellent book. So that was my gateway book into better understanding. So I'm a military background, but better understanding the Civil War, but not from the standpoint of true tactics and war fighting, but from the persons that were involved in it. And I thought his book really did touch us. So when I saw that on your list, at least for the United States side of the house, I was like, well, you got a good one, I think, with that one. I hope you enjoyed it.
Oh yes, well, fantastic. Yeah, it's thank you. That's lovely to know. Yeah, absolutely.
Yep.
So I'm sitting here thinking about, a majority of our audience are educators. We do have parents and students that listen too. I love the fact, Anne, that you've said, and I think you said in your TED Talk, you can always tell a lot about a person by what is on their bookshelves. And I totally think that's true. I'm sure Kristen would agree too when it comes to a school library, right? What's in the shelves of the heart of the school. And our listeners love lists. So I kind of had asked you ahead of time, and I know I'm sure it's really hard to choose, but I thought even if this is an opportunity for someone just to hear about a couple of books to read from other countries, maybe if they heard it from Anne Morgan, that would be a way to start that. Do you have a couple of books that you usually recommend to people if they wanted to start to do something like this?
Well, actually, Erin, I'm going to be a bit of a rebel, which is that I'm not going to recommend 5 books. I've got 5 resources, and the reason why is because I always say it's great when people use my list and as a jumping off point. I'm really pleased with that. And I do a book of the month review. I add a new review each month, so there are new things. But I think that when you read the world, it has to be an individual quest, and you should follow your own inclinations, your own curiosity. You don't have to. I'm kind of like worried about the idea of must reads, because I think as soon as you declare something a must read, it takes the joy out of it. It's kind of like, oh, this will be good for me, you know, and suddenly something in your heart sinks. Whereas actually, when you read the world, you can follow your own inclination. So if you're a crime fiction fan, why not go and see what crime fiction's like in Latin America or Japan? You know, if you like books with strong female protagonists, then start looking for some of those. The Norwegian book Kristin Lavransdatter, for example, is this extraordinary book with this central female heroine. Or if you like sci-fi, go and see what Afrofuturist sci-fi is like. You know, that all kinds of things. You can follow your own inclinations. So I was going to suggest 5 resources that people can use to read short summaries of books and see what they might fancy. So the first one is the website Words Without Borders, which is an online magazine. It's been going for years now. Each month they focus on a different country, and they feature short stories from writers in that country in translation, or articles about different books. It's a great resource. There's also the PEN organizations. PEN America, English PEN was the first one, and they give all sorts of grants for new translated books and to bring books into English, because it's more expensive to publish translated literature, because you've got to pay obviously the writer but also the translator. So they try and smooth that for small publishers particularly, and you can look and see what's been given a grant by the PEN organizations, and that can be a good thing. For those interested in younger readers' literature, there's World Kidlit. If you Google it, you'll find it, and they have a huge number of reviews of new things coming into English. There's also the US-based Global Literature in Libraries. I don't know if you know about this, Kristen, but they they're an initiative to try and encourage libraries to be more inclusive and outward-looking in terms of the literature they focus and they feature, and they carry information about huge numbers of interested translated books that are coming into the market. And then also finally, I know some people love it, some people hate it, but Twitter can be an extraordinary resource, because you can follow all kinds of amazing people on Twitter, particularly translators. Translators can be excellent. If you find a book that you read in translation that you really enjoy, see who the translator is, because often seeing what other projects they're involved with will lead you to things, and you'll see many translators are on Twitter discussing what they're doing or recommending other people's books. That can be a great source, and there are various hashtags as well that can be useful on Twitter. For a long time there was Translation Thursday, hashtag Translation Thursday, which was a big thing in the UK. I don't know if it was so much in the US, but on Thursday everyone would share details of what translated books they were reading. So I'm sorry that I didn't follow your brief, Erin, but it's more
adore you even more because of it. First of all, Kristen and I met through Twitter, so shout out to Twitter. That's how we met. Kristen, let's try to bring back in the US Translation Thursdays. I think that's brilliant. And second of all, you know, that was the whole purpose of my independent reading project, was to get students, to get kids loving to read, because they're getting to pick what they want. So I think that was absolutely perfect, and continue to be a rebel, please.
Thank you. I'll try.
Okay, so I'm curious. We ask all our guests this, and is there a teacher, a mentor, a coach, or someone growing up that you'd like to kind of tell us about or shout out? We like to kind of just hear different stories, lifting up other educators from our lives.
I think I was fortunate to have several really good teachers, but I suppose when I was thinking about this question, one who stood out in my mind was a teacher that I had in what we call secondary school in the UK, so mostly teenage years, and she was an English teacher called Mrs. Gledhill, and she opened our study with asking all of us to bring in a piece of literature that had moved us in some way, whether that was to tears or fear, something that had evoked a strong emotion. And she started off by sharing Lear's speech at the end of King Lear, and she read it out, and she brought herself to tears with it, you know, reading it out. She was so and throughout her teaching, she kept coming back to the emotional connection, the personal connection to a story, which I think is easy to get lost when you're studying literature. It can become very academic and very much in the head. But she kept sort of encouraging us to focus on our responses and our emotional connection to the text. And I think that was a hugely valuable thing, and something that I've holding on to, that how do I respond to this, even if I can't be certain of everything that's going on. And that when you're reading literature from many different unfamiliar traditions, there are going to be lots of things you miss, lots of things you don't understand, lots of references that go over your head, but trying nonetheless to have an honest connection and pay attention to how this moves you, how this affects you, I think is a really powerful way of approaching books.
Absolutely. That's very cool. And I'm just sitting here thinking about how proud she must be or would be, because you've written a couple of fiction books yourselves.
Yeah.
Right. You wrote Beside Myself, and then you have an Audible called Crossing Over. So
yeah, which is actually coming out in print this year as well. So
that's super exciting. Yeah. Very, very cool. Well, this is a time, I hate to end the conversation, but this is a time where we're all going to just, if it's okay with you, kind of share maybe an aha moment or something you said that we just want to kind of pull and remember. Yeah, Pete's taking lots of notes. I've taken lots of notes. So if it's okay with you, we're going to kind of go around the circle, and then at the end, give you an opportunity if there's something that you didn't get a chance to talk about, or you want to just kind of leave us and our listeners as a food of thought. Does that sound okay?
Yeah, great.
Okay, great. Pete, I'm going to let you go first since you're all prepped and ready.
I am all prepped. So I wrote at the beginning, a kind and thoughtful challenge can change your life, your students, and even the world. And then as the conversation went on, I wrote, your passion, your work, your interactions, and the ripples that have come for it are so inspiring. And at the end, capital letters, doesn't matter where you are, what you are teaching, or who you are teaching. If you add storytelling to your classroom, it's going to benefit everyone. Storytelling is the key. I'm with that in the music room. I think music is just a different form of storytelling. It's all the same thing in my eyes, but adding storytelling to your classroom environment is going to benefit everybody. So thank you, and so nice to meet you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Nice, Pete. How about you, Kristen?
I wrote down the love of sharing stories unites the world. I push so much on like, read something where you're not the main character. The main character looks different than you, has lived different than you. And one, that was affirming, but two, that just uplifts the fact that, I'm not done. Librarians aren't done. There's so much more that we can do. And I feel ready to go back to work and order more books and recommend more. So I'm invigorated.
Hooray. Thank you.
That's awesome. All right, Fred.
That was great, Kristen. And Peter too, you brought some great points. We always, it's when we do these note takings, we don't know who's gonna capture the same thing. And I think we're all kind of in the same line. So I have a couple here, but I think the one I want to talk about is addressing the blind spots. And I love that notion where you're starting to become more aware of areas that you weren't familiar with. And in the world of technology and what I teach, of course, we're very applied. We think about, I don't know what the word would be, but our reading assignments aren't as heavy or as frequent as the other classes, the other disciplines. But I'm starting to get a sense now that it's something that should be woven more into our curriculum, because I do coordinate our program. And I think we're going to be revisiting this primarily because of what's going on with AI and how AI's role is an assistive tool, but how we speak to it and the knowledge that we bring to it is going to be very important. And I think reading is going to be a very important aspect to everyone's education going forward. If this thing is going to be there for us as a tool, how do we interact with it? And that broader experience base is going to be far more beneficial to you than not. So that addressing blind spots is really a cool notion for me to take away today. So thank you for being here, Anne.
Thank you. My pleasure.
Even coding, Fred, like you just gave me the idea of, coding in essence is a universal language, but at the same time, depending on what country you're from, I'm sure there's different styles of coding. Yes. So it'd be interesting to do a study on that. kind of look at
Yes.
that, the tone, the format, all that kind of stuff. So
Real funny note on that real quick. Somebody had once said that they had worked with somebody who had developed their code with a Russian developer. And as I'm hearing them say this, I'm like, okay, well, it's code is code. Code is code. Well, then all of a sudden I got to finally see the code. And it was written in Russian. So we had to go through the whole process of actually translating the comments and everything out of there because we needed to have an insight what was going on. But anyway, to your point, you're right. You're right on with there. And that's very good.
Cool. Very cool. All right. So mine is, I think, Ian, you said something that was kind of humbling or profound. I'm not sure. Maybe it's both. You said no one can be an expert in literature. The world is too big. And to me, I just think that that's just something to always remember. But the fact that you said, you know what, I'm going to do this, and you know that you couldn't possibly read all the books in the world, but just even make an attempt to do it, I think is great. And Pete mentioned the word passion. I think that's the point, right? This was a passion project, and you found a lot of other people that are just as passionate about reading or being open to reading different things from around the world. So I think that's really cool. And I'm so glad you came here and you shared those resources in your story. And so you as our guest, if there's any last thing or something that came to mind as we were talking, go ahead.
Well, actually, I think holding on to that not being an expert thing is important. And it's something that I try to do with my work. I do these incomprehension workshops that try to kind of encourage people to get comfortable with not knowing, not having all the answers. And there was a great example during this conversation, Fred, which involved your talking about killer angels, where I nodded and smiled and said yes. But actually, the truth is I haven't read that book. And it's on the list because it was a recommendation, but I should read it. So I read one book from every country, but I included the recommendations, the eligible texts. And I nodded and smiled because it's a habit. We are kind of conditioned not to say that you don't know something. It can be quite a difficult thing to overcome, and I find myself continually having to school myself about it. And that was a great example. And it was funny because I was like, I don't want to go into this big dive, having to explain that I didn't read all the books and so I'll just nod and smile and say, oh yeah, great. But after I was like, no, that's exactly what you don't want people to do. So there's a great example. We feel this pressure to be experts, to have all the answers, to know. And this is about not doing that. It's about being open, saying, I'm not an expert, I can't be an expert, but I can be curious and I can find out more and I can learn. And that is what connects us to people. That is what is the opportunity for growth.
Yeah,
Yes.
absolutely. And I think that's something as we continue to have these conversations with educators around the world, that's what we keep finding out is it's okay to be the person in front of your students that doesn't know everything. It's okay to be playful with them, to explore with them, to just have a day where it's not academic, it's just making a human connection, right? So I love that. I think we tend to learn more from each other when we do those kinds of things. So anyways, if people want to reach out or connect with you or see this list, where can they find you, Anne?
So the blog is ayearofreadingtheworld.com. And it's all there, and they can always leave a message. And there are details of my website there, and I'm on Twitter as well, at @A_B_Morgan. It's not the easiest Twitter handle, but you can find me if you go to ayearofreadingtheworld.com. You'll find all my other things there. So
excellent. And then also, I believe I saw all your books are on Amazon in the United States. They can order.
Yeah. So The World Between Two Covers is the US edition of my book, Reading the World. There is a more recent UK version, but it's not published in the US at the moment. But maybe it will be one day.
Okay.
But yes.
Wonderful. And Pete, where can our listeners find us?
Wherever you're listening to us, please leave us a review. We're on Instagram, Facebook, YouTube, and our website is teacherpeprally.com.
Yeah. And real quickly, since we've been talking about literacy, we've got another free 1-year premium subscription to Novel Effect to give away. So we gave away one to a fourth grade teacher. And so she's got that subscription. She's already started it. And hopefully on Facebook, I said, please share with us what you're doing with this application with your students. So in order to enter the drawing this time with the Teachers Pep Rally podcast, we're saying go to our Facebook group, Teachers Pep Rally Facebook group. Make sure you've joined if you haven't yet. Introduce yourself to the group. And then tell us a book you recommend from another country. Just give us a list of another book you recommend from another country. The contest ends March 31st. of this year, 2023. So don't miss out on this amazing chance for a free reading book. And thank you so much for your time. It's really nice to connect with you, and we hope to do it again.
Yes.
Thank you very much. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you, Anne.